Hi there, I'm Trish Triumph Sullivan, and today we're going to talk about portrait lighting. So let's get right to it. So portrait lighting is very important because when you're showing a person, the lighting is kind of the main thing besides that person's face that you have to deal with. The lighting's the most important part of the photograph. And then second would be background. But in this one, we're going to talk only about portrait lighting, right? So this is for a portrait. And in general, we're talking about a formal portrait when we're talking about this. But let's just get into some important terms. So the best kind of lighting for a portrait, right, because the lighting is very important, is fill, right? And remember, that's always with direct light. Now, when you're outside, remember the best time of day to take a portrait, right, with natural light, with sunlight, is early morning, right, or late afternoon. You don't want to wait. You don't want to do it before sunrise or after sunset. You want to do it early in the morning when the sun is up a little bit so the sun can actually be there, right? Or late afternoon. Okay, two important times. So best lighting, fill plus direct, and the best time of day, right? Early morning or late afternoon. So those are the two most important things. That's for natural light. Now, a lot of times you might go into a studio to get your portrait done in a studio. And if you're getting your portrait done in a studio, they're not using sunlight, right? They're using artificial lights. And so there's terms for these types of lights. So if you're it's for studio lighting, there's a main light. So if you were outside, the main light would be the sun, right? So if you're outside, that's your main light. Right? In the studio, it would be an artificial light, right? Like probably a photo floodlight. Okay, so your main light in portrait photography is also called your key light. Right? And the key light is the same as the main light, right? It's the same thing. Key light or main light are both correct. But in portrait photography, you'll hear people say key light. And key just means main. That's all it means. It's the primary source of light. That's it. If you look at the movies and you look at the credits and you'll see they'll say, key lighting or key grip. It just means the main person in charge of that, right? So the key light means the main light, right? And the fill light can either be a reflector in a studio, and studios often do use reflectors to reflect the light back on the subject. Right? To reflect the light back onto the subject. Or they could be a smaller light. So it could be a smaller light that's not as strong, okay? Because remember, we're not trying to get rid of the shadows. We're trying to fill in the shadows a little bit with the fill light, right? So that's what you're filling in the shadows. So a reflector works. And remember, the reflector could be white paper, white cardboard, a windshield reflector, right? Or so it could be white paper, a white cardboard, a windshield reflector, or it could be aluminum foil, right? And any of those will work for a reflector. Like most of us are not going to have anything like that, right? So remember, fill plus direct, early morning or late afternoon, best time of day. And in studio lighting, it would be a key light would be your main light, right? And then your fill light could be a reflector of some sort, right? That's your fill. Or it could be another light, a smaller, another smaller or less bright. Okay, so key light is your main light, and that's pretty basic for any kind of photography. Now, for portrait photography, so now let's talk about what to do with that light. Now, there's three main types of portrait lighting, right? And they're called butterfly, short, and broad, right? And these are pretty straightforward, all right? So butterfly lighting is when the light is coming equally from both sides. And it's called butterfly because there's a little shadow underneath the nose that makes it that kind of looks like a shape of a butterfly's wings, right? So butterfly would be if you're straight on the camera, right? And here's and the nose is here, right? And there's the mouth. Right? There's a shadow that comes underneath the nose that kind of looks like this. And along with the shadow on the top of the nose, which looks a little bit like this, it ends up looking a little bit like a butterfly, and that's why it's called butterfly lighting, right? But this is where the light is fairly equal on both sides. There's still a main light, right? And there's still a fill light or reflector, but it's pretty bright, right? It's pretty bright, and and it comes, and they're usually coming from this direction, right? From about 45 degrees. Right? And so that's why you get that light. There's still a main light and there's still a fill light, but it's fairly equal in brightness. This is just a little bit less bright. That makes sense? So that's called butterfly lighting. And that was where the light's coming fairly equally from, if I'm looking at the camera, from both sides of the face at about a 45 degree angle down in, from the side, like that, okay? So short lighting is when the short side of the face is the side that's lit. And so that means that the subject is turned slightly. So short lighting, so this is butterfly here. So short lighting is when, if you see the person's face, see the lights coming from this side, the main light, right? The person is turned slightly, and let me see if I can make this look halfway decent. Right, so if the main light's coming from this direction, right, only the short side of the face is lit. So let me see if I can kind of do that with my face to give you an idea. Now, unfortunately, I'm in a room where there's light coming from all directions, so it's really hard to say. But let's say that the main light is over there, right? So if my head was turned this way, only the short side of my face would be lit, and this side, the broad side, would be in shadow. So if I'm looking directly at the camera, my head's turned slightly, I've got the short side of the face with the light coming on it, and the broad side would be more in shadow. Does that make sense? So this is the short, that's called short lighting, okay? Broad lighting is opposite. So short lighting, only the short side of the face is lit, or the narrow side. Okay, so narrow side of the face is lit. And then on the broad lighting, the opposite is true. So on broad lighting, let's see, we'll try to do it this way. Do this kind of backwards for me anyway. So on broad lighting, the light comes and hits the broad side of the face, right? So it's coming in from the side, hitting the broad side. So this would be the wide side of the face. And then this side would be more in shadow. That would be like the short side would be more in shadow, right? And the broad side would have the main. So here, the short side of the face is lit, and then the broad side is in shadow. Right? So here we have short, and this is broad. So the wide side of the face is lit and the short side's in shadow. So that's broad lighting. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Butterfly, equal from both sides, right? Two wings on the butterfly. Short, the short side of the face has light. And broad, the broad side of the face is lit. So it's just depending on which way you turn. And they have a really different effects on your subject. So, and this is why professional photographers can use these lighting tricks, we'll say tricks, to make their subjects look better. Because the whole idea with the portrait is to make sure your subject looks good, right? A successful portrait is a portrait your subject likes, right? If the subject doesn't like the portrait, then you failed as a photographer, basically. And a professional photographer wouldn't have any business, right? If every photograph they took was crappy and the subject didn't like their own portrait, then the photographer wouldn't be in business for long, would they? Because nobody would be happy. They wouldn't get paid. So if you have a person who has a very round face, right? Or they're kind of on the heavy side, short lighting works good, right? It makes their face look a little thinner. If you have someone with a really narrow, like a long, narrow face, broad lighting works good. Because broad lighting will make the face seem a little fuller, okay? So if the face is round, this one might be more flattering, right? Short lighting. So short lighting if there's a round face, broad lighting if the face is narrow. And all that means is how the head is turned in relation to the light. So if the camera is directly in front of me, right, and my head is turned and the light's coming from this direction, and my head is turned this way, this would be broad lighting because the broad side, the wide side of my face would have light on it, okay? If I turn this way, same light source, right? And the broad side of my face was in shadow, right? And only this side was lit, that would be short lighting, Okay, so it describes exactly how the light is coming. Short light if it's the skinny part of your face, broad light if it's the wide part of your face. That makes sense to everybody? And of course, butterfly goes from both directions at once. Okay, and you see butterfly lighting, especially in old movie star portraits. You'll see that that's a real common one. It's not so common now, mainly because of that shadow under the nose. Some females especially don't really like that look, little kind of Hitler mustache look. So this is the basic lighting for portrait photography. And I want you to remember that taking a portrait in natural light, you have to have early morning or late afternoon if it's direct plus fill, sunlight. Another way to do a portrait, and I'm going to just tell you really quickly, is the same way we talked about for assignment number 5, which was your self-description. And that would be to place your subject next to a window. So if I had a window over here, and I had my person sitting here, right, or standing next to the window, not with sunlight shining into the window, but you'd want a fairly dark room and just have the window, light from the window coming, and they pull the curtains aside so that light would stream in, and the rest of the room should be dark. Okay, so this would all be dark over here. Right? Then you would set up a reflector next to your subject, so that when the light comes in, it also reflects off of there and back onto your subject, right? So you'd want to have some kind of a reflector on the opposite side of your subject. And you can have it propped up on a chair. You can have someone help you by holding something so that it's in the right, you want it directly opposite of how the light's coming in, okay? So you have light coming in through the window, hitting your subject, right? And you want it reflected back on the other side with either a white piece of cardboard, aluminum foil, or a car reflector, okay? And you want to make sure the background is neutral. So I recommend either tacking or taping up a piece of fabric that goes down, I'll use a different color, right? A piece of fabric that goes down behind your subject, so that when you're taking this portrait, the background is neutral, right? You don't want to like pictures and piles of dirty clothes and stuff like behind your subject, obviously, if you're taking it in your home. So light would come in from the window, right, and strike your subject. And this is where you can decide, and this is it's especially flattering for people that are older. Maybe they have a few wrinkles. Sunlight can be a little harsh on the skin if someone who's a little older. So doing this type of a portrait using a window as your light source, right? You remember you'll have to adjust your shutter and your aperture in order to have enough light, right, in your camera to make the exposure. And normally that's about 3 to 4 stops more light than the basic Sunny 16 rule, right? The basic settings, the benchmark settings. So you'd add like 3 to 4 stops more light into your camera to have a good exposure for that. So if you have the person sitting next to the window, the same thing, right? You can have them turn one way or the other way, and get and try both, right? Try both the short lighting and the broad lighting, and you can even try butterfly lighting, right? Try all 3 and see what's the most flattering for your subject. It may surprise you. See you in the next lecture.